Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, a security breach becomes a lesson for us all. But don't worry, we'll make some lemonade from this bad situation and leave us all with a lesson to protect ourselves. Plus, Demonoid users get phished, a big batch of your questions, and much, much more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 110 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on May 9th, 2013. This episode's brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible Scale Engine over at ScaleEngine.com. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey.
Hey. Hey. Well, okay. The cat's out of the bag. It's a secret. We are recording this on the same day we recorded episode 109 because right now you're not even here. You're like, I have this shot of you not being here, which I don't know why I have this saved anymore. But right now it's like you're not here. But you are here because we're pre-recording because you're at BSD Camp.
Yes, I will be at the BSD Conference in Ottawa. I give a presentation on Saturday morning. Saturday morning,
the Saturday that this episode comes out, there'll be a link at the top of the show notes if people want to watch that. And I'm looking forward to watching that. I will have that up, Alan. So
yes, well, because there's a whole bunch of great talks on there. Like just looking at the schedule, there's like an overview of security in the FreeBSD kernel and how that works by Kirk McCusick, who's like the grandfather of Unix, basically. Or
a big talk on DNSSEC.
Or Chris Moore from PCBSD talking about automating the deployment of FreeBSD and PCBSD using sysinstall.
Oh, the Bacula guys are giving a talk. Yep. Backup and restore with Bacula. That's right up your alley.
Well, that's tutorial, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the tutorials are the days before.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But yeah, and the main conference starts on the Friday.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, there's like using NetBSD to build a tracking radar for a rocket launching center. Or using multipath TCP. In FreeBSD, which is cool, or benchmarking FreeBSD, and
that's one we've gotten emails about.
Powell Dewedek, the guy that ported ZFS to FreeBSD, he's giving a talk about using FreeBSD Capsicum, which is the kind of like jail but at the app level.
Okay.
Geli, which is the disk encryption, and ZFS as the key components of a security appliance.
What is this switching from Linux crap? Look at this case study.
Yes.
Switching from Linux to FreeBSD. That's it.
Yes, this is a sysadmin who came into a shop that was a Linux shop, and he converted it to a FreeBSD shop, and he explains how to do that and how to make it easier on yourself.
As the host of Linux Action Show, I can't stand for this.
Right. It's mostly about how to convince the people that don't really know what Linux is. They know enough. They've heard about Linux before. They haven't heard about FreeBSD before, and they need to be educated that FreeBSD is better. Then there's a talk, lightning fast networking for virtual machines, and it talks about like modifying the drivers for like the Intel E1000 NIC to make it faster in virtualization. Or Sean Webb's giving a talk on runtime process infection, so injecting malware into a program while it's running. So you're not modifying the binary that's on the disk, but injecting the malware into the app as it's running. Or there's another talk, FreeBSD birth to death is managing the life cycle of a server from like the inventory and asset management when you buy it right through when you decommission it. Then there's a talk about getting Mozilla software running on OpenBSD. The Hail Mary Cloud, which is this low-intensity distributed botnet and how that works.
I mean, of course, you're bearing the lead. You have a talk.
Yes, sorry. And then on day 2, that was all on day 1.
Right.
On day 2 at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, I'm giving a talk called Managing FreeBSD at Scale, Reclaiming Control of Large Infrastructure Deployment with Puppet.
Nice, man. Oh, I like the scale, too, because it works on what you're actually doing and also play on the company name. Gosh.
That wasn't on purpose.
Well, but it's there. It's nice. It's clever.
But there's also a talk I would like to see happening at exactly the same time, which is kind of but there's the BSD ISP, which is serving data and video using only BSD.
Oh, yeah. I bet that's right up your alley.
Adrian Chad, who we actually talked about the other day when about the new Athros wireless setup. He's giving a talk on the future of wireless networking, including gigabit. And Baptiste Dosson, the guy that invented PackageNG, the new package system for FreeBSD, is giving a talk about that.
I got to start going to these.
Yep. There's a talk that I saw in Asia, but most people missed it because of the time zone difference. So you'll be able to watch it live. It's the surprising complexity of checksums and TCP/IP.
Alan, is your talk the only one that's going to be streamed, or will all of these be streamed?
All of them will be streamed.
No, at the URL you're putting in the show notes?
That's the idea. There's some technical stuff to be worked out.
So is this kind of a thing you're going to start doing for these conferences? Are you going to start going there and streaming them? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, we're hoping to have all 3 rooms running live streams at the same time.
Oh, have you tested that?
Not really. So, like I said, we hope to have all 3 rooms live at the same time.
Not as easy as it sounds. No. Are you using Wirecast? What are you going to use?
Just Flash Media Live Encoder.
All right. Well, as long as you can switch between the camera inputs, you're okay.
Well, they'd be 3 separate streams in 3 separate rooms, right?
And they have house audio and all that for you, right?
These are all things I'm not entirely sure about.
Okay.
And it's going to be complicated.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not promising there will be a live stream.
I know exactly where you're at right now. I know exactly. This is where I was at pre-Linux Fest.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have a big show this week. So not only do we have some great questions in the roundup, in the feedback section that we've saved, we've got some stuff from the roundup that we've been waiting to talk to you guys about, but also Alan has collected some great news stories for this week. So even though we're recording a week early, we still got a great show planned for you. Should we jump into our first story?
Yep.
All right, now this one's about name.com, right?
Yes.
Tell me all about it.
Name.com is basically a domain name registrar, and they were hacked. And so the attackers got access to the username, email address, password, and credit card information for the customers. Although Name.com says that they've used strong cryptography and that the passwords and credit card information weren't in plain text.
Okay, good.
No more specifically, they said the credit card information is 4096-bit RSA encrypted, and that the key is stored on a separate remote location and was not accessed. So it sounds similar to the setup we use at Scale Engine, where we GPG 4096-bit encrypt the credit cards. So the public key is on our web server so that it can encrypt the card. But the private key required to decrypt the cards only exists on my computer, and there's like the air gap there, right? Basically, I have to break into 2 entirely different systems that aren't connected in order to be able to decrypt the credit cards.
Right. I like the term air gap.
Yeah. It comes, I think, actually from like electrical connectivity.
Right,
like
yeah, it does. Yeah.
And they didn't provide much detail on how the passwords were encrypted.
Yeah.
Although a later Twitter update said that they're hashed and salted, but it didn't say with what algorithm. Or were they using something proper like SHA-256 crypt? Or were they kind of rolling their own and it's just a SHA-1 hash with a salt? And it's only hashed once, so it's not going to be that hard to crack.
This is the problem.
We don't know.
Yeah, we often don't know in these cases.
Yes, when we hear hashed and salted, and it's like, well, that's something, but, there's
it could mean a lot of different things.
Yeah. According to the email sent to all Name.com customers, the attack appears to have been an attempt to steal the domain of one specific large customer. So while everybody's information was compromised, it seems the entire attack was all about just taking over this one account.
Oh, wow.
They didn't happen to mention which customer that was.
Oh, yeah. Surprise.
I can imagine. And that they've also, I was digging through their Twitter and see that they have to take some special steps for some customers. Basically, the way they did it was email everybody a password reset URL. But some people, as tends to happen, especially with domain names where you only usually log in once a year, if that, some of those customers don't have access to the email address they used before. That's why it's important when you register a domain to have a real email address.
Yes.
Actually, you guys had that problem with the
Jupiter Broadcasting
domain. When Brian originally registered it, he used some email address that he later didn't have.
I mean, this isn't the GoDaddy ad, but this was one of the biggest life lessons I learned here. Was this is the problem that people run into is you register with a domain name registrar, you don't use or you use an email address that's current at the time. Maybe.
Yes. But maybe 3 years from now, when it's time to renew the domain or whatever, it's not all of a sudden.
And I'll tell you, just straight up, back in the day, before we really started podcasting, Brian and I were in the Mac scene. We ran this site called Res Excellence for a little while, and we were in the Macs, and he had a me address, like, Apple's iCloud stuff that was before it was called iCloud.
Well, it was actually mac.com then, right?
Yep. And he was like, Brian something at mac.com. Well, as we wised up and moved on from that, he shut down that email account. And then a few years later, we went to transfer the domain, and everything was pointing to that old mac.com address, which he didn't use anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. Which he couldn't get the emails that were sent to anymore.
Right. Couldn't go in there and couldn't access them because the account was closed.
Yep. And you have to be especially careful with that on some certain like free email providers, is that if someday someone else got that address, then they could steal your domain name.
Yeah, later on they could go sign it up after they release the account.
Yeah. But I remember having a problem like that with the domain when the registrar I was using went out of business or something, and some other registrar took them over, and one of my domains had old information that wasn't correct anymore. And in order to regain control of it, I had to fax a bunch of papers on special letterhead.
Yeah. I have done that for clients all the time. It's so stupid because, like, the domain, a lot of the smaller time domain name registrars be like, well, if you just send us a letter on letterhead, well, you know what, dummy? I can make up a letterhead in 15 minutes and put a letter on there and print it out and send it.
And steal the domain name.
Well, and I've done it, at request of my client, but I have done it. I've created a letterhead, I've printed it out, and I've sent it in. All on my own, without so it's the system is old and archaic.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, it kind of goes to show that can happen with the control of your domain names.
Yeah. There you go. Is that it?
Yeah, but that's about all I have for that one.
It's a good write-up that the Next Web had on it. And the chat room.
Yes, the Next Web also has some more write-up on it, and I think they've been updating it as it goes because a lot of this is happening still on Twitter. Because people have asked why Name.com hasn't posted the postmortem and stuff on it on their blog, and they're like, well, we're still working on it, but also they're waiting for their lawyers to okay what they can say or something like that.
That is an interesting angle to it. We've seen sort of Microsoft, the worst case. Remember after that Java exploit that was hitting iOS developers, and Apple came out and Facebook came out, and then weeks later, Microsoft came out and said, we were hit by the same thing. We just couldn't say anything because we were running it through the process. Each company sort of has their own approach, process, and internal policies they follow to disclose this stuff. And the result is we get different levels of information, different levels of technical detail, and we find out at different times. And the reason why that bothers me as a consumer, I want to know all the details immediately because I'm educated enough to know how that impacts me. So details on, how they're hashing it are important to me. But also just as a member of the industry, I find that information very valuable. So
Yes, and so the startup approach usually tends to be
quicker,
more friendly to us than the corporate approach,
where it's more sanitized, a little more generalized.
It's all dumbed down and stuff. Yeah, and it's like, sure, you can publish your press release with all that in it, but I want some bloody details.
Right, exactly. Yeah, can you just make both? Like, make the press release.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. It'd be interesting. I obviously don't have the time to do it. But if TechSNAP could get to the point where we actually have like real press credentials and could get companies to answer our questions about these stories,
it really doesn't take much. Also, it just takes time.
Yes, well, the main thing is that I would have to ask the questions before 2 hours before the show when I normally write the notes.
That's the hard part because these companies take, because I've tried this a little bit. I've experimented with this, and the issue is they take various amount of times to respond, and when they do respond, a lot of times it's, hey, we'll get you more information, or hey, would you like to talk to our PR guy, or hey, we're still working on this. It's hit and miss.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Alan. Well, good links for more information about that in the show notes. Let's move on to the story about Demonoid. Have you ever I know you could be using it for complete legitimate purposes, but were you ever a Demonoid.com or user?
Actually.
All right, I was. I'll admit it. It was a good BitTorrent resource.
Well, at one point it was hosted in Canada or something, wasn't it? Or the domain was. It was .ca or something.
Well, then you should have used it on principle right there. All right. So I guess there was a phishing attack or something going on?
Yeah, basically in July of 2012, Demonoid suffered a large denial of service attack and a bunch of different, I think there was 3 or 4 times that their database was hacked.
Yeah, they got hit.
And then later on, their servers in the Ukraine were seized by authorities and the site was shut down. This week, a site called d2.vu appeared on the internet claiming to be the resurrection of the site. And former users of Demonoid were informed via email and basically told, hey, the site's back up, come over here and log in.
Hey, everybody click this link.
Yeah. And So that suggests that the person that started up this reboot site had a copy of the original members database. Although on Torrent Freak, they say some users saying, well, I don't remember registering with that email address.
How'd they get that?
But, it didn't seem to be just general spam either. It seemed to have been targeted at people that had used Demonoid. So maybe some people just don't remember because it was a couple of years ago now. But anyway, so basically they sent out this email trying to get all the old Demonoid users to come to this site. And then the site was found to be serving malware. And eventually that got reported to the hosting company, and the hosting company shut the site down. Torrent Freak tracked down some more information about the owner of the site. Originally it was a hush mail address, but eventually they managed to get it to like an actual email address.
Funny how that always happens with hush mail.
Well, if you use like a certain username at hushmail.com, and then your real email address is that username at gmail.com, it's not that hard.
It's funny how often people do that.
Or if you use that same name on IRC or something, you can create these connections between people.
Yeah, I'll get these. I probably shouldn't give this away because it's one of my little tricks, but I'll get these emails from folks sometimes that are a little nasty, because especially if I say something that sounds like a conspiracy thing on this show. And I'll take their email address and I'll just highlight it, right click, Google search, and boom, 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 all of the forum posts they've ever made, like all of the sites they sign up for with that user ID. It is really universal.
Mm-hmm.
Happens more than you'd think.
Yep.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've seen.
They found that the owner of the site was Chinese and that he runs a bunch of other Chinese sites.
Oh, well, okay.
So that seems to be against this being the original people, like it claimed in the email. And it's also unlikely that the return of the site was real because it was hosted on a single low-power virtual server, a VPS, rather than a whole bunch of dedicated servers like it would if it was trying to reboot the old site.
Yeah, let me throw this on one VPS so it can't handle more than 15 users concurrently.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And the hosting company suggested that the malware may have actually come from the ads that were on the page. But based on the fact that it seemed to really be a large phishing scam, it's most likely it was there intentionally.
I have been receiving a couple of emails in the last month, phishing emails just like this from a Bitcoin site called Coinbase. And they had this mistake they were making where if you signed up as a Coinbase merchant, so you could take payments using Coinbase as a payment middle person, right. They would create these public merchant pages for you that included the email address that you used to sign up. Well, sure enough, somebody indexed that whole HTML flat pages they had out there, and my email address was on there. So about once a week, I've been getting these phishing emails, and they're getting more and more sophisticated, where it's like, oh, we need to verify something with your account, or, oh, you've received a donation. Click this link. And if you look at the account, a lot of them are Heroku-hosted apps. And what these guys are doing is they're quickly taking code, either from some site or something, building it up and throwing it up on Heroku, tossing up these knockoff websites that look a lot like the legitimate websites, and then emailing links out to people. And then as soon as they're discovered, Heroku shuts them down, but they can just spin up a new instance in 10 minutes. It's been about one a week for about a month and a half, 2 months. So it's getting ridiculous. So you got to watch out. I also got one for a bank recently. So the phishing stuff is at an all-time high. Just check it because they're looking more and more legit. They're adding formatting to the emails. It looks very professional. And you always just have to check the links. Always look before you click. Yep. All right, Alan. Any other thoughts on that story?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. One second, I lost my show notes.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yes, there was a couple of things.
Oh, okay.
If you got such an email and either signed up on the new site or attempted to log in on the new site, you probably need to change your password if you use that password anywhere else because it was captured, right? If you recall a previous episode, TechSNAP, where we talked about my experience with the PayPal bug bounty program.
Yeah.
Basically, what I had found there was somebody had compiled all of the different hacked password databases they could find, like the LinkedIn one, the Gawker one, mostly ones that other people had posted, basically, and got all the username and password sets out of those, and then tried them against PayPal. Mm-hmm. And found, oh, look, out of those millions of people on LinkedIn and Gawker and all the other password databases, here's 1,000 of them who use the same email address and the same password for their PayPal account. And I now have their PayPal account. Right? So if you use the same password anywhere, you should stop doing that. And also, you've now given that password, your email address and password, or username, email address, and password away, and people can try that on, try the password on your email or try that username and password on another site related to torrents or something and take over your account.
Are you, when you're pulling down your emails like for the shows and your scale engine stuff, are you at your desktop doing all through Thunderbird?
Show emails go to my Gmail, which I access through the web interface, whereas my company emails go into my Thunderbird.
So Fether, he makes the script. Fether makes the point in the IRC chat room. TechSNAP is live 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern over at jblive.tv, and you can hang out in our chat room and leave comments. And Fether says, he says also, by the way, make sure your email client doesn't have JavaScript turned on because, if you're loading up an HTML email and there's some nasty JavaScript in there, that can start doing stuff before you even realize it. What are your thoughts on that? Do you worry about that?
I don't think Thunderbird runs JavaScript by default.
Yeah, I don't think it does either, but I'm not sure.
Because that would seem like a horrible thing to do.
Yeah. So the one that jumps out, the obvious one, is Outlook. And I think probably most of our audience is aware of that. It is something to consider. Is not only is Outlook a target, but it generally, it's kind of a combination of factors. You're on a Windows desktop. You often have the entire Office suite if you have Outlook installed. So there's sort of a set of assumptions an attacker can take. So that is, I think, a pretty good point Fether's making in our chat room, which is maybe consider turning off HTML or JavaScript at least in your email.
I know. I've often done that just because some emails come in badly formatted and you can just
there's that
do them
too.
Simple or look at the plain text.
Yeah, there is that too. All right, Alan. Any other thoughts?
Or mostly because when I send an email, it's always in plain text.
Yeah.
So when I'm replying to someone who sent as HTML, I usually can
convert it back to plain text.
Do it as plain text to reply, so that my reply doesn't end up as HTML. Because
you and I are from the same generation. It's like email should be plain text. Okay.
Yes.
That's why. Even the Jupyter Signal. Angela sends out the monthly Jupyter Signal, and every time, it's one of the things I like about Mailchimp is we make sure that there is a plain text version.
The mine and encoded to text version is attached as well. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. All right, Alan. Well, I want to take a pause right here, right now, and thank our sponsor for the TechSNAP program. We are 110 episodes in, and I don't know when exactly around when GoDaddy joined us, although maybe somebody in the audience does. But GoDaddy has been a long-time supporter of the TechSNAP program, and they have a special deal for the month of May. Use the code TECH249, TECH249 to get a .com for $2.49. All right. Half the apps on my smartphone probably cost more than $2.49, and now you can own a .com for $2.49. That is an outrageously good deal, especially if you're as old as Alan and I are, where .coms were like $1,500. Yeah. So let me tell you how good $2.49 is. But maybe you're not getting a .com because you're an insane lunatic who wants to get himself like an SSL cert. Maybe you're one of those paranoid freaks. I've heard they're out there. Want your SSL? Use our code GO32OFF3 when you're checking out. You get anything you're ordering for the first time from GoDaddy.com for 32% off. Boom! 32% right off the top. Mitt Romney up in here. I'm cutting the rates down to 32%. Yeah, that's an old reference. But, the election wasn't that long ago. Go over to GoDaddy.com and use our code TECH249 to get a .com for $2.49. Or use the code GO32OFF3. And you know what, Alan? What do you think? Is it gaming the SEO system if our audience out there has .coms they haven't been using to have them direct to the Jupiter Broadcasting website? Am I calling upon the evils of SEO black magic, or is that legit?
Not really.
All right, so there you go. If you want to buy a .com and have it point to the TechSNAP program, that's a good idea. People ought to come up with really good .coms that are like catchphrases for TechSNAP or like sysadmin things that people need to know about and have it point to the TechSNAP show page. And use our code TECH249 when you grab that. You support the show. You let GoDaddy know you appreciate them sponsoring the show. Keeps the Jupiter Broadcasting Network going. It is the circle of life. Thank you to GoDaddy.com for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. And thanks to you out there for supporting our sponsor.
Yeah.
All right, Alan, I think...
Well, because the nice thing about GoDaddy with the management interface, and we kind of talked about it a little bit in the last episode with the delegation, is, eventually, sometimes with the process, you need to take someone's access away, right? Like, we kind of talked about it with the Onion story about, don't fire your sysadmin. But at some point, maybe the sysadmin does leave or you fire him or whatever.
Yeah.
So if you have some other domain registrar where you had to give them the username and password for your domain account, they could have changed it and now own the account instead of you. Or, they have the password and you have to go change it and deal with it or whatever. But with the GoDaddy system, you, as the owner of the company or whatever, own the domain, and then you delegate control over it to certain people. And at any time, you can take that away.
I love that. I love that.
So that way you can give the sysadmin or even the consultant access for the amount of time they need it and then take it away, which is much better than sharing passwords. Sharing passwords is bad.
You know, gosh, you know what? They should hire you instead of Danica. You should there. So there you go. Thanks to GoDaddy. Now
I'm not as pretty.
Well, I'll give you that. No comment. With you traveling on the pre-show on the live stream, you and there was some I don't remember who it was in the chat room who was asking for some new audiobook recommendations. Every now and then we've done that on the show, and it's actually gone over really well. And
yeah, especially the Threat Vector one from Tom Clancy.
Was good. All right.
It had a lot of fairly legitimate computer hacking stuff in it.
What was cool about the Threat Vector one is it came out around the time you were visiting, so we both got it. You know, that was... I got a new book that I just picked up and just finished. It's an audiobook. I know you've got a new book, but you just started it.
Yeah.
Do you want to recommend it yet, or do you want to wait? Not yet? Okay. Right. I have one I want to recommend, and I know you're traveling. You're probably going to finish the book you've got, but if you end up with a little extra time, if you burn through that book, there's one that's very cool. And at first, I think it's going to sound like it's not appealing, but it is exactly for the technophiles out there. It's called The End of Money. Counterfeiters, Preachers, Techies, Dreamers, and the Coming Cashless Society. This is written in 2011, before Bitcoin was kind of a big thing, or cryptocurrency, but it really establishes the case from a very well-researched, very insightful point of view on what the limitations of money are in the internet generation. And it essentially builds this amazing case for cryptocurrency without even intending to do so. I found this book to be extremely, extremely enlightening. I did skip one of the chapters because it was not exactly appealing to my interest, but the way it's broken down, it's actually very interesting. Overall, it was a great book. It was 8 hours and 1 minute long, and that was just enough time that with the Whisper Sync functionality, I listened to some of it at my desk, I listened to some of it in the car, and I listened to some of it while I was going to bed. And I'll include a link to this in the show notes. If you grab this, it's an affiliate link, and you support the network by purchasing this book. You know, and you get it for free too if you're a new Audible subscriber, and you can even cancel and keep the book. Another book, though, just as a reminder, if you haven't grabbed it yet, is Threat Vector, which both Alan and I...
Or actually, the one I'm reminded of, I don't know if it's an audiobook or not, but...
what is it? I'll check.
It's Beyond Fear by Bruce Schneier. It was what I read on the way to BSDCan last year.
I don't think they have an audiobook of that. No.
No. I don't know if you'd want it as an audiobook, actually.
Well, but it's read by Bruce, that'd be interesting.
About security in an uncertain world, and it kind of covers... the concept of security theater, and basically it's talking about mostly about computer security, but mostly in the context of physical security, like talking about, you know, breaking into a house or a building and thinking about how the same concepts apply to computers, right? Defense in depth, like having a moat around a castle.
Well, what computer do you own that would be safe in a physical attack? What system? What system do you have that is safe? Because I don't bother
encrypting any of my hard drives, so none of them.
Right. And even your best box, if somebody has access to it locally, they can get single user mode. And
well, you can change that so that requires a password.
Yeah, but have you?
No,
neither have I.
Even then, if it's not encrypted, they could mount it from some other system that doesn't enforce that.
Yeah, which is
so unless you're using mandatory access controls and a bunch of other things, is going to get all kinds of...
And you know, the practical matter of that isn't really like, I'm not so worried that somebody's going to break into Chris Fisher's house and access his Hackintosh and get access to unedited episodes of TechSNAP, right? I'm not too worried about that. Right. But on the grander scale, what's more likely to happen is somebody could get physical access to a data center or some area that has a bunch of servers combined, and that's where really the issues are. And if you're somebody who's in that position where you're securing systems like that, that sounds like the kind of thing you need to be reading about. You know, audiobooks aren't for everybody, but if you like podcasts... yeah, they're probably for you.
Yeah, exactly.
You're probably the person. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes towards the end of the news segment. The book that I just finished, absolutely loved it. I meant to make it a Plan B pick, but I just haven't had a chance yet. The End of Money, incredibly, incredibly good. It was written by David Woolman and narrated by Dan Hagen, and he did a great job. So you can go check that out.
Yes, the best thing about Threat Vector was that it was narrated by... what's his name?
We should put that in the show notes again, too, because it was really good.
Yes. What's the guy's name?
Threat Vector. I'll look it up. You want me to look it up?
Yeah.
Let's see. Threat
He's
vector.
famous. He does movies and TV shows.
It was narrated by Lou Diamond Phillips.
That's it. Yes.
Yeah. I have it. I have it here.
Yes.
It's a cool thing about Audible too, and this isn't. They don't pay for sponsorship. Alan and I just both happen to like them, and when you're working, sometimes it's nice to have this kind of stuff.
And this specific one was my first book with the Amazon/Audible
sync thing.
What's the sync thing called?
On the far side of the bathroom.
Whisper sync.
He tried to reach for the knife that he kept in his pocket.
But yeah, anyway, what it was I have the Kindle version, the text version, and the Audible version, and they're synced. So I can listen for a while, then switch back to the text, and when I go back to listen, it fast forwards to where I left off in the text, and vice versa.
Yep.
And also, when you buy the Audible edition, after you buy the Kindle edition, it's only an extra like $2 or something.
Yeah, they prorate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Whisper Sync, and it's freaking awesome. And it's not just between the book and the audio version; it's also between all of the audio devices. So I've got it on an iPad, I've got it on my Note, I've got it on a Nexus 7, and whatever device I feel like listening to Threat Vector on, they're all synced up. It's so cool. Anyways, didn't mean to.
Yes, because like I used that when I was in Poland. It's like I had my Kindle and I would read it, but one day we went out and I was on a train for a long train ride, and I didn't bring my Kindle with me. So I whip out my Nexus S phone and open up the Kindle app.
Yeah, and I think the reason I got thinking about it, because they should advertise on this show because we're such fans, but they don't, is I was kicking around the idea of taking a train trip, and I thought, gosh, you know what I would do on a train trip is I would load up on audiobooks. And so with your trip coming up, we wanted to make a few picks. We'll have links to them in the show notes. If you do grab them, they'll support the network, but they're just there for... Or go grab the text version if you're not an audio fan. But if you like podcasts, you'll probably like them.
Yep.
All right, Alan. Well, since that's all the news for this week, I think that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Mr. Jude, our first email this week comes from JBViewer7 guy. That's what he said. He says, I've been running my email server on CentOS for about 6 years now, but managed by WHM. I meant to ask what that is. What is
a web hosting control panel app. It's kind of like cPanel, but different.
Okay. All right. Okay.
It's like web hosting manager. Or something.
Okay. He says, however, the server has got to go as I'm selling my main site. Therefore, I've set up all of my personal emails somewhere else, and I'm going to kill all my personal site that I've had for over 4 years. So now I've got a new server running CentOS 6.4, which is also my private OpenVPN server. But I don't want to have a cPanel situation. Hopefully, not even Apache. So what would be the best way to set up my emails? I'd like to use some desktop email clients like Geary or, Thunderbird. So I just need something that can handle POP or IMAP and possibly encrypt the emails. Been using Gmail till now, but, with all of Acta, Pippa, and all that kind of stuff going on, I think it's time for encryption. I'd like a good email solution and possibly something that has a MySQL database for the email backend. What tools should I use? Any tutorials you guys recommend? All I can find on Google is not sufficient, and my Stack Overflow question has not been answered. So I'm asking you, what possibly should I run? Love the shows, especially Coda Radio, LAS, and Plan B, and of course, TechSNAP. Keep up the good work, and thanks.
Yeah, I run Exim on almost all of my servers. It's a mail server program, and I have it set up to use flat files rather than a database. And it's on not all the servers. Some of them I do by hand, but some of them are managed by DirectMail, which is a program like cPanel. For Scale Engine's email, we use Postfix, which is popular, and that's actually backed by a MySQL database. And so we just have a couple of tables with usernames and Blowfish hashed passwords, like bcrypt hashed passwords. So that's fairly simple to set up. There's instructions on the Postfix site. And so that's your SMTP server, your mail server. And the username and passwords are in, and everything's in MySQL. And then we use Dovecot as the IMAP/POP3 server. Now, at Scale Engine, we don't offer POP3. It's completely turned off, but we have IMAP. And for both of those, we enable SSL. We have an SSL certificate that we feed into both of those apps, and they provide the encryption connections. So actually, for IMAP, ours is set up so you can't connect unless it's over SSL. all connections to download mail from the server must be encrypted.
Okay. And now are only Scale Engine employees using
that? We have one customer that uses that as well.
Okay.
But yeah.
But they're sophisticated enough to manage that.
There's not really a way to make IMAP behave like POP3. I don't know what you mean by behave like POP3, but POP3 is horrible. Don't use it. IMAP is better because, especially now that everybody has multiple devices, because in IMAP, you can mark a message as read, and it shows up as read. That way, so like I have my computer, my laptop, and my cell phone. If I read an email on my cell phone, it now shows up as read on all my other devices because IMAP. IMAP is good.
Yeah, he's mainly asking because he likes the ability of downloading it and just completely removing it off the server, so that way they don't have a record.
You can do that with IMAP if you want.
And he's kind of making the supposition that they're not still storing the email in that scenario.
Right.
Just because you delete it from your inbox doesn't mean it's deleted off their hard drive. I'm gonna have the unpopular answer here because it's not the geeky techie thing to do. I have opted to no longer manage this problem myself because my needs have gone beyond just the requirements of IMAP. I need shared calendar and a lot of other things. So I've actually elected to go to hosted email. However, if you're on CentOS, this is probably way beyond what you need. But I would like to make the recommendation for Zimbra. I've deployed a lot of Zimbra systems on top of CentOS, and Zimbra is an Exchange killer. It uses MySQL for the backend, so you can have these huge email inboxes. I've had clients who I've moved off of Exchange to Zimbra simply because their email inboxes are so huge they needed something that could scale. Zimbra has a very, very sophisticated indexing system as well as also a workspace management solution, and it's free. Nice. There's also some pay solutions there, and Zimbra works great. You can just take it and load it on top of CentOS or Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and it works. It's an awesome solution, and the webmail client for Zimbra is on par with any desktop client. It's really, really good. So there you go. That's that. If I wasn't using Google Apps for my email, I would probably run a Zimbra system. All right, there we go. Yep. Good question, JB07. And
so yeah, if you want to roll it yourself, then yeah, like postfix and Dovecot or XM and Dovecot.
Yep.
And you can enable SSL on both of those so that everything to and from your machine is encrypted.
And it's very simple. It really is.
Yep. And even most other mail servers that will speak SSL will notice and upgrade to SSL. Like when emails come into us from Gmail, our mail server says as part of the header, we can do SSL. And Google's like, okay, great, we'll do SSL.
And I would just say to JB07, go Google search CentOS perfect mail server, and How to Forge has a step-by-step guide on setting up.
If you just go to Postfix, they have some guides as well.
This is nice because it's based on CentOS 6, which is he is running, and tells him exactly the packages and how to set it all up. It's the system you're talking about, only a step-by-step guide. Yeah. And you just Google perfect CentOS perfect mail server setup, and the first link is the how-to.
I keep mixing that question up with the next one.
All right. Well, the next question is from Sean, and he's got a question about jail downsides.
But you skipped a question.
I did skip a question. You're right. The next question is from Jason, and he's got a question about how to make the jump to FreeBSD.
Yes.
He says, "Hi, chaps." He's a Brit, so he's allowed to say that. "I've been considering moving to FreeBSD for some time. Some of my server tasks, which I normally run on Linux, would run fine on FreeBSD. I have a couple of questions which I hope Alan might be able to answer. I'm looking for an equivalent to netfilter's IPsec command, which allows me to load large hashes into memory to block geographic areas in IP tables. Plus, is there an equivalent of keepalive-d, which is very good at the VRRP implementation in Linux? Cheers, Jason."
For VRRP, which is a virtual router redundancy protocol, all the BSDs have CARP, which is the Common Address Redundancy Protocol, and it's basically the same thing. For loading a list of IP addresses to block, PF, the packet filter from OpenBSD, has a bunch of different ways to do tables. IPFW and FreeBSD, I'm not sure about. I've never tried to block a very large bunch of IP addresses before.
Well,
I'm not sure that that's that valuable, honestly, but for loading a whole bunch of stuff, PF has a system called address tables that's kind of designed for that. And they can even be added to dynamically, I think.
There you go. Address tables is the answer.
Yep.
All right, Sean writes in with a question about jails. He says, "Hi, Chris and Alan. I've been hooked on BSD jail since you answered my question about running Linux in a jail. but I have some questions about the trade-offs with jails versus a full hypervisor. Jails seem like a good solution for a multi-tenant web app server, but if traffic major spikes on one of the apps, like maybe a DDoS or it gets slash-dotted, will that jail affect tenants in other jails by overwhelming the host? Does a fully virtualized system offer a more strict control over resource pools? Is physical redundancy the only real way to combat this? Lastly, this is probably a Chris question, but LXC or Linux containers, are they ready for prime time? I've seen a few commercial products that use LXC, but most information I can find about it is on the Arch wiki. Arch is great, but I don't know if I want to deploy it for a client. Thanks for the awesome shows. I've been listening since day one, and I've loved every episode. TechSNAP is easily my favorite podcast. So what do you think, Alan?
Okay, so start with those questions again at the top.
Jails versus hypervisor.
Right.
He says
So
he's worried about like
whether,
a lot of traffic to a jail.
So if one jail gets too much traffic, will it starve the other ones?
Right, exactly.
Kind of. The scheduler in FreeBSD is good in that it wouldn't let that happen too much, but you can do things about that, right? Jails can use the CPU sets, they're called in FreeBSD, and basically you say, this jail is only allowed to use these CPU cores. So if you staggered it, so every jail is allowed to use all but one CPU core, but the one it's not allowed to use is different in each one, that means that no one jail can hog all the CPUs or something. But of course, you can't have problems with memory.
Can you limit? Oh, okay.
Now, there's a separate set of tools that's it's fairly new. It was only merged in like FreeBSD 9.1 or something. But we talked about it back when FreeBSD 9.0 came out. But it's the RACCT, or R account, and RCTL, which let you do resource accounting and resource control.
Oh, okay.
So you can say, this jail's only allowed to use this much RAM, or this jail's only allowed to use this much CPU.
There you go. This is new, though?
Yes. Okay. It's quite new. Like some of you would have to run the dash stable version and like merge to patch or something.
Okay.
But
so it's in the works.
Yes, but there's a version of it that's out now, and so you can limit the resources of a jail probably more granularly than you can a virtual machine.
But if you're going with currently implementable shipping technology, that does seem like that seems like a limitation of jails, especially on the memory usage aspect.
Yes, on the memory. But again, it depends on how you're set up. Like if you're renting the jails out to people, then you have a little less control. Whereas if they're yours, you can impose your own regular resource limits. But basically, the memory is basically the only one that you could control better with a virtual machine.
Yeah.
But the main difference is the virtual machine is going to be slower.
Well, and like in VMware ESX, for example, I can say 20% of all cores. Right. And I can say distribute across all cores, but just 20% is allocated. That's nice, right? Because especially when I have
you can do limits like that with the new limit system, but it's still fairly new.
And it's more granular than just cores. It can actually be like amount of CPU.
Yes, this one, the R control system is the amount of CPU, whereas the current thing that you've been able to do for years is just CPU sets. It's basically CPU affinity, like you can do in any OS.
Nice. Yeah. Right. That makes sense. So this is something that you kind of has to wait for a little bit.
It's in 9.1, so not really. But it's getting better all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things too where like
a lot of it is it's like new, so there's no tools to help you do it.
And it's also if it's set up right, like for example, the Jupyter Broadcasting jail, right, should never consume beyond a certain amount of memory. And if it is consuming beyond a certain amount of memory, there's probably actually something else wrong that you need to address, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And depending how you're set up. Now, again, it comes down to if you're setting up all the jails, it's easy to keep control over everything.
Yeah.
If we're renting the jails out like VPS is kind of...
You don't know what they're going to do.
Some silly customer sets their Apache to spawn 4,000 children, then that's going to be a problem.
And also, if you're doing more service-based stuff like 15 streaming servers, 15 instances of a streaming server, those are all likely going to take X amount of memory, and that's going to be fine. So it could just be that some workloads are better situated for jail, that way you get hardware-level performance, and some workloads are better situated for virtualization, so you have granular control.
The other thing with jails is the fact that your network is not really virtualized. So especially if the virtual VM isn't using like VirtIO to do high-performance networking, if it's emulating an actual network card and so on, then
a lot more overhead.
The performance you can get out of a jail is much better.
Right. Yeah. Because it's native.
Yeah, basically using the real kernel who has real access to the real.
That's a really good point. That's a really, especially when you want a high-performance website.
Performance, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay.
So, yeah, there's trade-offs both ways.
Yeah.
But jail has more upsides than downsides, is the way I see it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I have a current client who has to convert PDFs and a lot of really crazy architect images to one standard particular format for their website. And they have this conversion box, and it's a virtual machine. And the reason why it's a virtual machine is depending on the drawing they get, sometimes it's a CAD file, whatever it might be, the conversion process can just consume tons of memory and processor. Yep. And so they've put that in VM because they just say, this VM group has X amount of resources allocated to it. It's never allowed to exceed X. And that particular type of workload seems like that makes sense for a VM. But then you have something like maybe a Jupiter Broadcasting website where when TechSNAP's posted, maybe we'll have, a huge spike in traffic on a Thursday night, and then it kind of settles down. I wouldn't necessarily want to resource limit that.
Right.
I kind of like the fact that it can spike.
See, that's the thing you can, with virtual machines, like some of them now have this like ballooning memory thing where you can overcommit memory and stuff. But most times, when you configure a virtual machine, you give it X amount of RAM.
Right. It's hard.
So if you have 10 virtual machines, you have to have that much RAM, and you have to have as much RAM as you're giving out. Whereas with the jails, everybody's sharing all of your available memory, so it can get used better.
Very cool. All right. Should we shift gears to ZFS? You ready?
Sure.
All right. Michael writes in, and ZFS, right. Let me get that set now. This is Chris and Ellen. Enjoying the show as always. Thank you for the response to my previous question about ZFS hot spares on FreeBSD. My new question is about using a separate log device for my Zpool. I'm not sure if there would be any major added performance using an SSD or pair of striped SSDs for a ZIL or ZIL pool, Zpool. Yep. Oh, Zpool. Oh my God. My Zpool consists of dynamic stripe across 4 mirrors using PCIe SAS controller with enough bandwidth for all of the drives. Because the stripe is over 4 mirrors, the read and write speeds for the pool are very high. Any input would be great. P.S. I use your affiliate links when buying all of my gear, especially new InfiniBand HPCs. Boy, are they fast. Well, thank you, Michael.
Yeah. So as Hermit points out in the chat room, with your ZIL, you want to mirror, not stripe, because losing your ZIL is really bad. So you'd want to mirror it rather than stripe it. But yes, SSDs for your ZIL is the recommended setup because lower latency.
I'm losing. Remind me again what a ZIL is.
It's the ZFS intent log. It basically stores the changes right away, so basically when you write some data, it can store it on the SSD and then flush it out to the hard drive later.
Right.
And basically it means that when you say, normally when you do a write, it doesn't return until all the data is safe. By having a ZIL, you can make that sooner.
And so the idea of putting it on
a small SSD, like generally you wouldn't put like a whole 240 gig SSD as a ZIL.
But maybe
you don't need that much.
Like maybe in his case, he's got 2 or 3 like 64 gig or 128 gigabyte SSDs. Is that kind of
the
idea?
So basically, normally you do 2 because you want to mirror them because if you lose it, it's bad. So you mirror them, and generally, if you have bigger ones, what you do is you'd partition it and use like 8 or 16 gigs or something of ZIL off the 2, and then use the rest of it as an L2 ARC, right? The level 2 adaptive replacement cache, and that will improve your read speed by caching data to the SSDs to make it even faster for reading.
And the ZFS file system just determines what should go into that cache automatically?
The L2 ARC, yes.
And the larger it is, the more cache it just does?
Yes.
Okay.
And then with the ZIL, that's basically improves your write speed by lower latency.
Because it can write it to the SSD.
Even if if you have a bunch of drives connected on SAS, and like my home array, I have 4 regular desktop SATA drives, and I can do 400 or 500 megabytes a second.
Damn, dude.
But if I was seeking all over the place or trying to read 10 files at once, the performance would go way down.
I see.
Whereas one SSD could do that same 500 megabytes a second, but if I was doing 10 at once, it would do 50 megabytes per second each of those instead of like 100 kilobytes a second on each of them.
And this in like a file server where you have maybe 100, 200 users hitting the file server, asking for files, asking for all that kind of stuff, that could sort of improve overall performance so all your users are getting active
Yeah, so your ZIL will improve your write speed, and your L2ARC will improve your read speed.
Aha.
Now, both the L2ARC will need some tuning. By default, because when they came up with the concept of an L2ARC, SSDs were small, slow, and expensive, and died quickly. By default, it'll only fill the SSD at like 8 megabytes a second. So basically, it could be writing out more, but it doesn't want to write the entire SSD, and then you never request that file again, and then it overwrites with something else, and you never request that. So it only caches, there's a speed limit. There's two. There's regular and turbo mode. It uses turbo mode to fill up the drive until it's all the way full, and once your cache is full, it will only overwrite at the regular speed. There was a talk at EuroBSDCon. We've linked it in a previous episode, but Martin Matruska, or whatever his name is, gave a talk about tuning ZFS at EuroBSDCon 2012, and that explains how to tune that stuff.
Very nice, Alan. Okay.
But basically, yeah, it's ways to use an SSD to improve your performance, even if you already have, a bunch of drives on a fancy SAS controller and lots of RAM. You can still always make it better.
Absolutely. There you go, Michael. Hope that helps.
Basically, ZFS doesn't trust your RAM as storage, right? Because as soon as the power goes out, that goes away.
Right.
So it allows it to flush stuff to the SSD, so it can say that data is safe, and then eventually move it over to the actual hard drive.
So smart.
And then the L2ARC allows you to use that SSD, even though you only have like 100 gigs of SSD and say 30 terabytes of disks, it means, that basically the L2ARC is where, when stuff won't fit in RAM, where it can store it and it still be fast.
I like that. I get it. Very nice. I think that answers Michael's question. Okay. All right, if you want to send a question into the show, you can email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or that contact link at the top of the site, and then you just choose TechSNAP in the drop-down. That's the easiest way. Or even better, start a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. That's our subreddit, where you can submit stories and discussion threads to the show. But with the feedback all done, Alan, I think that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite fit in the very top of the show. We still wanted to give you links to follow up on your own after the show. And a lot of these links are provided by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And our first story this week came from that very subreddit. Here you go. It's, ironically, you wouldn't have guessed it, about Internet Explorer. The U.S. Department of Labor website was serving a 0-day Internet Explorer 8 exploit. Yeah, that's right. The U.S. Department of Labor. Researchers now believe that a watering hole, quote-unquote, attack targeting the U.S. Department of Labor Force website served an exploit that took advantage of a previously unknown vulnerability in Internet Explorer 8. A malicious script on several pages that was detected by researchers directed victims to an attacker-owned site serving the Poison Ivy remote login Trojan, and then they would get remote access to their machine after visiting the Department of Labor. So, okay, if you go to the Department of Labor website, which I don't know, Alan, if you've heard about the unemployment statistics in America, but rather high. You go to the Department of Labor's website, use Internet Explorer 8, and this malware would get loaded on your box that would give the attacker remote access to your machine.
I don't have the link in the story here, but there was a similar story I saw last week about the British unemployment service requiring you to have Internet Explorer 6 and Windows XP to visit their website.
Oh, jeez. It turns out, this is a little update to the article, the Department of Labor isn't the only website affected. According to researchers...
I have the second link here is, the Internet Explorer 0-day also hit 9 other sites.
Yes, yeah.
Including one specifically targeting workers at U.S. nuclear plants.
Yeah. And again, these were the attacks that are exploiting a previously unknown and currently unpatched vulnerability in IE.
Exactly. So that's the use of a good 0-day, is you get it up on these watering hole type sites, and then you can compromise the computer of the guy sitting in the control room of a nuclear power plant that's just browsing around because his job is to sit in the control room for 12 hours a day and watch over stuff. And so he browses the internet. And you compromise his computer, and then you jump from there to another computer, and then all of a sudden, oh, look, they didn't expose their industrial control system to the internet, but if you're if you've infected a computer at the power plant, now you can control stuff you weren't supposed to be able to, or whatever.
Oh man. Here, let me just slip this little malware in there for you. All right. Well, this has been a topic that's come up on the show from time to time during the roundup. These new smartphone-based messaging services where you can take a picture or you can send a message, and the promise is that the service will automatically delete or destroy the message within a certain amount of time. So if somebody takes a picture of their junk and then sends it to Alan Jude, they could, in theory, have that message auto-destruct within 30 seconds. Well, it's all theory, of course, as is now being covered by local news stations around the U.S. Deleted snapshot photos saved on your phone can actually be pulled once they hook it up via USB. So
this is on both ends too, right? Like you would expect if I take a picture, it's saved on my phone, and then the service copies it, and obviously they don't delete it right away to make sure that it got sent properly. But the thing here is the service is guaranteeing or claiming that the recipient will be able to see the picture, but then it'll be destroyed, and they won't be able to have access to send it to someone else or something, right?
Yeah, these guys.
Because that was always the worry in this particular case. Is that I'm going to send somebody something, but I don't want them to be able to send it on to other people afterwards.
See, these researchers have an app. They hook up in this demo a Note 2, which is what I have, via USB, and then they have an Explorer. They can go in there and just pull off all the pictures that supposedly Snapshot has auto-deleted, but it saves a copy of them in the local phone storage. And one of the things that's happening more and more is, either at border crossings or at routine traffic stops, police officers can take a smartphone and they have a device they can hook up, and it'll just download all of this stuff on it.
Yep.
So if you're taking pictures of your junk, stop it. Is essentially the moral of the lesson there. Stop doing that, because according to this researcher, they can hook it up via USB and they can see it. Which I mean, really,
even though you thought it was deleted,
is anybody in our audience all that surprised by this? Probably not. Probably not. All right, Alan. All U.S. telephones are recorded and accessible for the U.S. government. This is your story.
That's what this one guy is claiming. So it's a former FBI agent. What's his name here? Something. Aaron Burnett. And
Aaron Burnett from CNN.
Yeah, he was interviewing Tim Clementi, who is a former FBI counterterrorist.
It's Aaron Burnett is a she, and she's a hell of a she. Let me tell you.
Okay. Anyway, so she asked the FBI agent, Tim, is there any way, obviously, there's a voicemail that can try to get the phone company to give up the voicemail. It's not a voicemail, it's just a conversation. There's no way they can actually find out what happened, right? And then the FBI agent says, no, there is a way. We certainly have ways in national security investigations to find out exactly what was said in that conversation. It's not necessarily something that the FBI is going to want to present in court, but it may help the investigation and or lead specific questions. And then Burnett says, so they can actually get that? People are saying, look, this is incredible. And he says, no, welcome to America. All of this stuff is being captured as we speak, whether we know it or not. So his claim is that the U.S. government records everything.
I mean, we've had NSA whistleblowers since the mid-2000s.
Former AT&T engineer Mark Klein revealed that AT&T and other telecoms had built a special network that allows the NSA full and unfettered access to data about their telephone calls and the contents of email communications with all their customers.
Right. I mean, on Unfilter, I've played an NSA employee who quit and became a whistleblower and said, my team worked with ISPs to install boxes to capture a copy of all of the traffic that is sent. At this point, if people don't know this is happening, then they are willfully being ignorant of the facts, because there's been several whistleblowers that have talked about this. What is outrageous is that it's happening. And so the way it works is...
Well, like this article even at The Guardian, they're like, in 2010, the Washington Post published a story that said, every day, collection systems at the NSA intercept and store 1.7 billion emails, phone calls, and other communications.
Yeah. Now, they're not using these in day-to-day legal cases because they don't have a warrant for these things. They don't have the legal precedents to have them. However, in cases of national security, the entire set of rules changes, and what they can draw upon is completely different. And in these cases, they can actually pull from these records. Now, here's what's disturbing to me, and if you don't know about this, then you should probably look this up if it bothers you. Is they are storing all of it, everything. They're storing everything. So I think of somebody like my son Dylan or my daughter Abby, who are 4 and 2 years old. Everything they do so far has been online, mostly in part thanks to their mom posting it to Facebook. But eventually, they'll get to an age where they're going to start posting it, and they're going to start publishing it. Everything from their from close to the moment of their inception, but not quite, thankfully, from that point on, is online, and will be for their entire lives, always recorded. Every email they ever send, every instant message they ever send, every Skype chat they ever have will be recorded. Now, what happens, say 25 years from now, if my son Dylan commits some sort of fraud, they'll be able to go do some sort of SQL query and pull up all of Dylan Fisher's history of everything that's happened over the last 25 years because they've recorded it all. And that, I think, is the danger of what's happening here. Because it really, honestly, do we have anything to hide if you're not breaking the law? Probably not. But maybe if you look at something in the grand scheme of things over years and years of time, there's probably something you'll do probably at some point in your life that you'd prefer they don't record. But the reality is, it's happening.
And, there's limits on what they can do in some of these places. Like, if they're capturing the data at my ISP, they can't read my email because it's encrypted between my computer and my server. Mm-hmm. But they could capture it from the other side. If someone sends me an email from an account at their ISP that's not encrypted, then they can capture it there before it gets to my server, where it then only goes encrypted.
Yeah.
So email, again, almost all email that's sent at some point goes unencrypted, and so they can get it. But like certain conversations, like all the conversations I have over IRC are over SSL, but people on the other end aren't. So it depends on a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I realize
it goes to the point we made last episode that Bruce Schneier was saying, collecting all of this information doesn't make anyone more secure.
Right. And remember, the FBI just came out and said that we don't need a warrant to read your emails, just like all the other government agencies don't need warrants to read your emails. And there is actually laws on the books that say email that's of a certain age doesn't require any judicial warrant to get access to. That's on the books now.
See, that rule was supposed to say if an email sits on a server for 6 months and isn't used, it was meant for an email that was abandoned. Although, with POP3, when email got deleted off the server once you downloaded it, that was one thing. But now with IMAP, where you store everything on the server, it doesn't work the same.
Right. And so it's striking, right? I mean, you don't think about it, but all they actually have to do is just go to Google and say, hello, Google, it's been more than 180 days since this email was delivered to this user, and for national security purposes, we're going to need access to this inbox. Could you just enable that for us? And without you ever knowing, it just happens.
And yeah, they're like, also, you can't tell the person about it.
Right, because of the Patriot Act.
If they were allowed.
Thank you, Patriot Act. Thank you for that. There you go. A little bit of sunshine for your afternoon diet. All right, Alan, moving on in the roundup. Let's see. Our next story here is an infograph on the trouble with passwords. I put this in here because I just thought it was great. It's an infograph that kind of just outlines the password proliferation issue that we've run into, which was a topic that was picked up in last week's episode of TechSNAP. On average, cost per data breach for a business in 2011, $5.5 million. So it's very, very expensive. 27%. That's the percentage of organizations that require their employees to remember 6 or more passwords. So think about that problem and the vulnerability that opens up. It's a great infograph. Anyways, 44% of consumers change their passwords only once a year. That doesn't surprise me at all. Actually, it's higher than I expected it to be. How do you remember? How do you store your passwords? 59% by memory, not using LastPass. Only 33% clocked in with password management software. Actually, maybe a little better than I expected. 33% maybe a little better than I expected. Oh, man. And then here's one that I like. Strictly note or typed every time with a note near my computer. Only 7%. I'm going to call shenanigans on that one.
Well, the worst is the 11% of people who have a Word doc somewhere on their computer, probably on their desktop, that has all their passwords in it.
I think it's more than 11%, Alan.
Yeah. Well, this is just of the people they surveyed. So knowing who they surveyed will change that.
The correlation between passwords and workplace productivity. Number 1, employees who cannot remember their passwords have to call the help desk, burning time and money. Number 2, forgetting passwords forces employees to go through the self-service resets. And number 3, also having frequently change your password disrupts productivity. So it's a challenge. And like we talked about last week, the password is not the ideal solution to this problem, but it's kind of the best compromise.
But yes, and like if we think back to that when the reporter had his Apple account taken over, and remember how easy it was for someone to pretend to be him and get Apple to do the password reset.
Yeah.
Part of the reason of that is because between 10 and 30% of all help desk calls are for password resets. And that means that the average password reset costs somewhere between $50 and $147 in labor, like wasted time of all the people involved, and so on.
Yeah. Anyways, that infographic is great. If you want to go check it out, that's just a few of the little tidbits from it. Alan, thankfully, I'm not a CenturyLink customer, but if I was, I might be a little upset this week.
Yes. So, the internet going out somewhere or other is something that happens. But in this case, it was a nationwide outage.
Oh, man.
So CenturyLink, which at last report had 5.8 million customers, had a nationwide outage that affected all of their customers.
Mm-hmm.
And as of yet, I don't think there's a postmortem explaining what happened. But in their statement, they said they were working with their vendors to get things back online. So it seems like it was a problem with their router or an update or something.
Yeah, they say they're working on the disruption right now. Did you hear about Syria going offline for 19 hours?
No, but CenturyLink was back up by midday the day it went down.
Oh, okay, that's not all right. I mean, but for a whole region.
5 million people without internet for half a day is a lot.
Oh. Yeah, in Syria, the internet went down for about 19 hours, according to a bunch of internet traffic monitoring websites, and it was, of course, during the civil war that's going on there. And as always now with a lot of the epic nationwide internet outages, there's the accompanying traffic graphs, which show the immediate drop off. Which are always great. Like here's the internet just going around.
Syria, the part of the reason that their traffic drop is they don't have much redundancy in place, right? Because I don't know if that internet was turned off on purpose or if it was just a matter of.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. I don't know the details on why it went out, but if for 19 hours it was pretty much nothing coming out of Syria, and then 19 hours into it, DNS came back online and people started getting online. Oh man, could you imagine 19 hours without the internet? I think.
Yeah, that was my Tuesday.
Oh really?
Yeah, my internet went out at about 5 a.m. It didn't come back on until like 6 p.m. So I guess that was 13 hours.
Was it the best day of your life or the worst day?
I did a lot of housework. Yeah. And I went and got a haircut. And
so you were kind of productive is what you're saying.
Not really, no.
Oh, okay.
It screwed up my productivity horribly.
I was
planning to spend the whole day writing my presentation for BSD Camp. It was hard to do because it was in Google Docs.
Were you doing all your email from the cell phone?
I did a little bit of email, but I kind of took I used it as an excuse to take the day off.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's kind of
I would have rather not, though.
Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, Alan. That's all I'm saying. All right.
I would have rather not.
Yeah, I think that's everything we have in the roundup, right? Anything else?
Nope, that's everything. We're good.
Boom. Then there you go. That's the whole show. Once the roundup's done, the show's done. But don't forget, you can join us live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
Boom, over at jblive.tv or jblive.info for the audio stream. Also, don't forget we have the subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv where you can submit stories into the show. You can start conversation threads, get a discussion going with the TechSNAP community. It's a great way to get something in front of our eyes for this show. Also, I'd like to remind folks, if you want to support the TechSNAP program or the Jupiter Broadcasting Network in whole, go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and scroll down to the very bottom of our websites where you'll find links for our affiliates like Amazon US, Amazon UK, Amazon DE, eBay, Netflix, Newegg, ThinkGeek, Best Buy, Mint.com, Audible.com, and Code School, where you can learn coding by doing. They have some amazing programs, as well as some web browser extensions for Firefox and Chrome. Just go over to Jupiter Broadcasting and click those links before you shop. All right, there we go.
Yes. Watch the live stream, because we just live streamed for 3.5 hours.
I know, right? Yeah. I know. And I think after the whole day, it kind of got all jammed up because I was just looking over at the monitor and it was all frozen. I was like, are we still on the air? But I think we're good. So thank you to everybody who supports the network by using our affiliate links or our browser extensions, where you'll get more sites like Monoprice and others. And don't forget, you can send your feedback to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And we'll try to read your questions on a future episode of the show. Alan, have a great trip. Good luck at BSDCan.
Yes.
And don't forget, folks, we'll have a link in the TechSNAP show notes where you can watch Alan's presentation live, assuming the bandwidth is
Everything
there.
works.
Yeah.
Yes.
Maybe we'll hear a war story about that.
Enough upstream to do 3 or 4 live streams is kind of pushing it.
Yeah. Good luck with that, Alan. And hopefully we'll get to watch it. All right, everyone.
In Japan, but...
Well, Japan's kind of got internet up the wazoo, from what I hear. So,
exactly.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.